Months had passed since the trial, and life had begun to settle into a new rhythm for Ava and Daniel. The initial wave of media attention had slowed, but the impact of their efforts continued to ripple outward. Communities across the country were inspired by Ava's courage and determination, sparking conversations about accountability and reform that hadn't been possible before. People who once felt powerless now saw hope, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change was achievable. On a crisp autumn morning, Ava stood alongside Daniel at a memorial ceremony held in honor of her father and others who had lost their lives to police violence. The event took place in a park where Marcus used to walk, now renamed General Marcus Holloway Memorial Park. A bronze plaque bore his likeness, along with an inscription: "A leader, a protector, a beacon of justice." As Ava traced the engraved words with her fingers, she felt a deep sense of pride, not just for her father's legacy, but for how far they'd come in keeping his memory alive. The crowd gathered around them was diverse, united by shared grief and a commitment to progress. Speakers included activists, community leaders, and even former officers who had joined the call for reform. Each story added another layer to the tapestry of resilience, woven together by those determined to create a better future. When it was Ava's turn to speak, she stepped up to the podium, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began, looking out at the sea of faces. "When my dad died, I thought the world would move on, like his life didn't matter. But you proved me wrong. You showed up. You demanded answers. And because of that, we're starting to see real change." Her words drew murmurs of agreement from the audience, many nodding in solidarity. She went on to thank Daniel publicly, acknowledging the sacrifices he'd made to stand beside her. "He taught me that redemption isn't about being perfect. It's about trying to do better, even when it's hard. That's something we can all learn from." As fireworks lit up the evening sky, a tribute to resilience and unity, Ava found herself reflecting on everything she'd endured. Losing her father had shattered her world, but it had also given her purpose. Through pain and perseverance, she discovered strength she didn't know she had. More importantly, she learned the value of connection, the way people could come together to support one another through the darkest times. Later that night, as the crowd dispersed and the park grew quiet, Ava lingered near the plaque. Daniel joined her, offering a small smile. "You did good today," he said softly. "Your dad would have been proud." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I miss him so much," she admitted. "But I feel like he's still here, you know. Like maybe this is what he wanted all along, for us to keep fighting for what's right." Daniel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Then let's keep going. There's still work to do." And there was. While significant strides had been made, Ava knew the journey toward true justice was far from over. Systemic issues couldn't be solved overnight, and there would always be resistance from those unwilling to change. But she wasn't afraid anymore. With Daniel by her side and a growing network of allies behind her, she felt equipped to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they walked away from the park under the glow of fading fireworks, Ava whispered a silent promise to her father. "I'll keep fighting. For you, for us, and for everyone who deserves better." It was a vow rooted in love, loss, and unyielding hope. And though the road ahead might be long, Ava knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of celebration and remembrance, Ava understood something profound. Healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about carrying forward the lessons of the past to build a brighter tomorrow. Together, they had turned tragedy into transformation, proving that even in the face of unimaginable loss, light could still shine through. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with anticipation as reporters, activists, and community members filled every available seat. Cameras flashed like strobe lights, capturing the tense atmosphere that had been building for months. Today marked the culmination of Ava and Daniel's relentless pursuit of justice, a day when accountability would finally be demanded from those who had long operated above it. Officer Mark Reynolds sat at the defendant's table, his face pale and drawn. Beside him, his attorney whispered reassurances, but the weight of the case seemed to press down on him visibly. Across the aisle, Ava sat alongside Daniel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Though she appeared calm on the surface, her heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and resolve. This wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about exposing the cracks in a system that allowed such tragedies to happen again and again. As the trial unfolded, evidence poured in. Body cam footage showing the chaotic moments leading up to Marcus Holloway's death. Expert testimonies explaining how easily the situation could have been de-escalated, and internal memos revealing patterns of misconduct within the police department. Assistant Chief Gregory Langston took the stand reluctantly, squirming under cross-examination as Daniel pressed him on his role in shielding officers from accountability. Each revelation sent ripples through the crowd, whispers spreading like wildfire, as the truth came into sharper focus. But the turning point came when Daniel himself testified. Standing before the judge and jury, he didn't shy away from his own past mistakes. Instead, he laid them bare, acknowledging his complicity in systemic failures while emphasizing the urgent need for change. His voice trembled at times, raw with emotion, but his words carried undeniable power. "I failed once," he admitted. "I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. But today, I'm here to say enough is enough. We can't keep letting fear and pride dictate our actions, not when lives are at stake." His testimony struck a chord, not only with the jury but also with Ava. Watching him confront his flaws so openly reminded her why she'd chosen to trust him again. It wasn't about perfection, it was about growth, about doing better even after falling short. By the time Daniel stepped down from the stand, there were tears in Ava's eyes, not of sadness, but of pride. When the verdict was finally delivered, the room fell silent. Officer Reynolds was found guilty of manslaughter, though many felt the charge didn't fully capture the gravity of what he'd done. Still, it was a victory, a rare instance of an officer being held accountable for taking a life. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse as news spread, protesters chanting Marcus Holloway's name in celebration. For Ava, the moment was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring her father back. In the weeks that followed, sweeping reforms began taking shape. New training protocols were implemented for K-9 units, stricter guidelines enforced for use of force incidents, and independent oversight committees established to monitor police conduct. While these changes wouldn't erase decades of harm overnight, they represented a crucial step forward, a testament to the power of collective action. For Ava, the fight wasn't over yet. She continued advocating for broader reforms, using her platform to amplify voices often ignored by those in power. Daniel remained by her side, mentoring her in navigating the complexities of activism while grappling with his own redemption arc. Their bond had grown stronger through shared struggle, transforming them from reluctant allies into something resembling family. One evening, as they stood together overlooking the city skyline, Ava turned to Daniel with a small smile. "Dad always said progress takes time," she said softly. "But I think we're proving him right." Daniel nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your father would be proud of you, Ava. You've done more than honor his memory. You've carried his legacy forward." And for the first time since losing her father, Ava felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would still be challenging, but she knew she wasn't alone. Together, they had sparked a movement, one that refused to let the world forget the cost of silence or the value of standing up for what's right. The closer Ava and Daniel got to exposing the truth, the tighter the noose seemed to draw around them. Their investigation had uncovered enough evidence to shake the foundations of the police department and possibly bring down some of its most powerful figures. But with that came risks neither of them could have fully anticipated. Late one night, as they pored over documents in Daniel's home office, a sudden knock at the door sent both their hearts racing. Daniel hesitated before answering, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun he kept nearby. When he opened the door, a courier stood there holding an envelope marked confidential. The man said nothing, simply handed it over and left without another word. Back inside, Ava watched anxiously as Daniel tore open the package. Inside was a stack of papers, classified FBI memos detailing misconduct investigations from years ago. But what made Ava's stomach drop was the name attached to one of the cases, Daniel Carter. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel sank into a chair, his face pale. This shouldn't exist anymore," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "It's old. Ancient history." Ava read over his shoulder, piecing together the story. Decades earlier, early in his career, Daniel had been part of a task force accused of covering up excessive force used by agents during a high-profile raid. Though he claimed innocence, the report suggested otherwise. At the time, the scandal was buried under layers of bureaucracy, and Daniel walked away with only a slap on the wrist. Now someone had dredged it all back up and leaked it directly to the press. Within hours, the story broke online. Headlines screamed about hypocrisy within law enforcement. FBI agent exposed for past misconduct. Reporters swarmed outside Daniel's house, demanding statements. Social media erupted with accusations, painting him as a fraud who had no business advocating for justice. For Ava, the betrayal stung deeply. How could she trust someone whose hands weren't entirely clean? Confronting Daniel later that day, Ava's anger boiled over. "You lied to me," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You told me you wanted to fix things, but you're just as guilty as they are." Daniel didn't defend himself right away. Instead, he sat quietly, letting her rage wash over him. When she finally ran out of words, he looked her straight in the eye. "You're right," he admitted. "I did fail. Back then, I chose loyalty to the system over doing what was right, and I've regretted it every single day since." His honesty disarmed her, if only slightly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she demanded. "Because I was ashamed," he confessed, "but also because I thought maybe I could make amends by helping you. By making sure your father's death didn't go unanswered." He paused, his voice cracking. "If walking away is what you need to do, I understand. But please know this. I'll still fight for Marcus. For you. Even if it costs me everything." For days, Ava wrestled with whether to cut ties with Daniel. Trust, once broken, felt nearly impossible to rebuild. Yet something about his vulnerability resonated with her. She remembered her father's belief in second chances, in redemption earned through action rather than words. Could Daniel truly change? Or was he too entrenched in the very system they sought to dismantle? In the end, Ava decided to give him one last chance. But on her terms. Together, they crafted a public statement. In it, Daniel admitted his past mistakes, taking full responsibility for his role in the cover-up. He announced his resignation from the FBI, stepping down not just to protect Ava's cause, but to show the world that accountability starts at home. The move shocked everyone, including Ava. It was a sacrifice far greater than she expected, yet it proved his commitment in a way nothing else could. As the dust settled, Ava realized Daniel's decision had shifted the narrative. Public opinion began to sway, focusing less on his past sins and more on the broader issues of systemic corruption. His fall from grace became a rallying cry for reform, proving that even those complicit in injustice could choose to stand against it. For Ava, it reinforced her belief in the power of courage and the importance of holding people accountable, even when it hurt. Though their journey was far from over, Ava knew one thing for certain. Daniel had earned her trust again. And together, they were stronger than ever. With Daniel's help, Ava began peeling back layers of the truth that had been hidden beneath bureaucracy and fear. It wasn't easy. Every step forward seemed to uncover new obstacles. But together, they formed an unlikely team. Daniel brought decades of experience navigating government systems, while Ava contributed relentless determination and a fresh perspective untainted by years of compromise. Their partnership became a blend of mentorship and collaboration, each pushing the other to keep going when the weight of their mission felt overwhelming. Their investigation started small, combing through police reports, body cam footage, and witness statements related to her father's death. At first glance, everything appeared routine. A call about suspicious activity, Officer Reynolds responding as protocol dictated, and then the tragic escalation with Zeus. But as they dug deeper, inconsistencies began to surface. For one, the initial caller who reported suspicious behavior claimed they saw Marcus pacing near homes and peering into windows, a claim contradicted by surveillance footage showing him simply walking down the sidewalk. The discrepancy raised red flags. Was this a case of miscommunication, or had someone intentionally exaggerated details to justify involving law enforcement? Then there was Officer Reynolds himself. Though he had a clean disciplinary record, interviews with colleagues revealed troubling patterns. Some described him as overly cautious, quick to escalate situations where de-escalation might have worked better. Others hinted at biases he didn't bother hiding during casual conversations. These revelations weren't enough to prove wrongdoing on their own, but they painted a picture of an officer whose judgment may have been clouded by prejudice. But the most shocking discovery came when Daniel accessed internal memos from the police department. Buried in dense legal jargon was evidence of a disturbing trend. Officers involved in controversial incidents often received minimal consequences thanks to influential figures shielding them. One name kept appearing repeatedly: Assistant Chief Gregory Langston, a high-ranking official known for his close ties to local politicians and wealthy donors. Langston's fingerprints were all over cases where accountability had mysteriously vanished, replaced by hushed settlements or quietly shuffled transfers. Ava and Daniel realized they were dealing with something far bigger than a single bad decision by one officer. This was systemic corruption, woven into the fabric of institutions meant to protect people. As they pieced the puzzle together, the stakes grew higher. Anonymous threats began arriving, cryptic messages left on voicemail, unsigned letters warning them to let it go. Someone out there didn't want the truth coming to light. Despite the danger, neither Ava nor Daniel backed down. They knew exposing the rot within the system would require more than just evidence. It would take courage to stand up against powerful forces determined to silence them. Late nights turned into early mornings as they strategized how to present their findings without being dismissed or discredited. Daniel used his FBI connections cautiously, reaching out only to trusted allies who shared their commitment to justice. Meanwhile, Ava continued rallying public support, using social media to share updates and humanize the fight for reform. As trust between them deepened, so did their bond. Ava found herself opening up to Daniel in ways she hadn't expected, sharing stories about her childhood and the lessons her father taught her. In return, Daniel spoke candidly about his regrets, not just losing touch with Marcus, but moments in his career when he'd chosen silence over speaking out. Together, they became not just partners in pursuit of justice, but healers of old wounds. Yet even as progress mounted, the looming threat of retaliation loomed larger. Every breakthrough felt like a race against time, knowing those implicated wouldn't hesitate to strike back. Still, Ava refused to let fear dictate her actions. Her father had always told her, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. With Daniel by her side, she vowed to honor that lesson, no matter what came next. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were closer than ever to unraveling the truth. And nothing would stop them now. The cafe in downtown Washington, D.C., buzzed with the hum of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups. Ava sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped tightly around a warm mug of tea. She had chosen this spot because it felt neutral, quiet enough for privacy, but busy enough to ease the awkwardness of meeting someone she'd never known. Still, as she glanced toward the door every few seconds, nerves bubbled inside her like a pot about to boil over. What would Daniel Carter be like? Would he live up to the image she built in her mind from those old letters and photographs? When he walked in, Ava recognized him immediately. Though older now, his sharp features and confident stride matched the younger version in the pictures. He scanned the room briefly before spotting her. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Ava saw something flicker across his face. Sadness, maybe, or guilt. Then he smiled softly and approached the table. "Hi," he said, his voice steady but tinged with hesitation. "You must be Ava." She nodded, standing to shake his hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. "Thank you for coming," she replied, suddenly aware of how young she sounded compared to him. Sitting back down, they both fumbled through small talk, the weather, the cozy atmosphere of the cafe. But it didn't take long for the conversation to turn serious. "I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner," Daniel admitted, leaning forward slightly. After everything that happened, I wanted to call, to offer my condolences, but," he trailed off, shaking his head, "I wasn't sure if I deserved to intrude on your grief." Ava studied him carefully. There was sincerity in his words, but also a weight he carried, something unspoken. "Why did you two stop talking?" she asked bluntly, surprising even herself. She hadn't planned to dive into such personal territory so quickly, but curiosity got the better of her. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's complicated," he began. "Marcus and I were inseparable once. We joined the army together, dreamed of making the difference. But as we grew older, our paths diverged. He believed in fighting injustice head-on, no matter the cost. Me, I thought change had to come from within the system." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "We argued, a lot. About policing, about accountability, about what it means to protect people. Eventually, pride got in the way, and we just drifted apart." There was pain in his voice, regret etched into every word. Ava listened intently, trying to reconcile this man with the father she remembered. "Did you agree with him sometimes?" she asked quietly. "About the need for reform?" Daniel nodded slowly. "More than I let on. Marcus always had a way of seeing things clearly, cutting through the noise. He challenged me to do better, to think bigger. But I was stubborn, stuck in my own beliefs." He looked down at his coffee cup, swirling the liquid absent-mindedly. "I miss him, Ava. More than I can say." For the first time since her father's death, Ava felt a connection, not just to Daniel, but to the fuller picture of who her father had been. Here was someone who truly understood Marcus, flaws and all. Someone who shared pieces of his history she'd never known existed. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation shifted from memories to action. Ava explained her efforts to seek justice, the protests, the growing movement inspired by her father's legacy. To her surprise, Daniel didn't dismiss her ideas or shy away from the responsibility he might have in helping. Instead, he leaned in, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights born from years of experience in law enforcement. By the time they parted ways, Ava felt a spark of hope she hadn't expected. Daniel promised to help her dig deeper into the circumstances surrounding her father's death, using his connections to uncover truths others might try to bury. As she watched him walk away, Ava realized this meeting wasn't just about closure. It was the start of something new. A partnership, perhaps. A chance to honor her father's memory not just with words, but with action. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that justice might still be possible. As the days turned into weeks, Ava Holloway found herself navigating a whirlwind of emotions. Grief still lingered like a shadow, but it was now accompanied by something else, a burning need to understand. Who was her father beyond the man she knew as Dad? What drove him? And why did his death feel so much bigger than just one tragic mistake? These questions swirled in her mind as she sifted through old photo albums and boxes of mementos stored in their attic. One evening, while going through a dusty shoebox filled with letters and documents, Ava stumbled upon something unexpected. Tucked inside an envelope was a faded photograph of two young men in military uniforms, arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiling brightly. On the back, Written in neat cursive were the words, "Marcus and Daniel, brothers in arms, always." Ava recognized her father immediately, but the other man was unfamiliar. Curious, she flipped through more papers and discovered a letter addressed to Marcus from someone named Daniel Carter. The tone was warm and personal, filled with updates about work, family, and shared memories. At the bottom of the page, Daniel signed off with a title that made Ava pause. Special Agent Daniel Carter, FBI. Her heart raced as she pieced things together. This wasn't just some random friend. It was her father's best friend, someone he had trusted deeply. But why had she never heard of him? Why hadn't this Daniel reached out after her father's death? Questions piled up faster than answers, and Ava felt a mix of frustration and intrigue. She decided to dig deeper, searching online for any mention of Daniel Carter. It didn't take long to find him. His name appeared in several news articles related to high-profile cases. He was real, accomplished, and very much alive. Ava hesitated before reaching out. Writing to a stranger, even one connected to her father, felt daunting. But something inside her urged her forward. After drafting and redrafting her message, she finally sent an email introducing herself and explaining what she'd found. Days passed without a response, and Ava began to wonder if she'd made a mistake. Then, late one night, her phone buzzed with a reply. Daniel's words were cautious yet kind. He expressed shock at hearing from her and admitted he hadn't spoken to Marcus in years. There was regret in his tone, a sense of unfinished business between them. Despite the distance, he agreed to meet her, suggesting they talk face to face. For Ava, this was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Could this man help her uncover truths about her father's life? Or would he only bring more questions? In preparation for their meeting, Ava dove even deeper into her father's past. She learned about his early days in the army, his rise through the ranks, and the accolades he earned along the way. But she also uncovered hints of tension between him and Daniel. Disagreements over how justice should be served, debates about fairness within systems of power. It seemed their friendship had fractured under the weight of differing ideals. Yet, despite these rifts, there was undeniable respect between them, buried beneath layers of pride and misunderstanding. The closer Ava got to meeting Daniel, the more she realized how little she truly knew about her father's world. He had always been her hero, larger than life, but now she saw him as something more complex, a man shaped by choices, struggles, and relationships she never fully understood. As she packed her bag for the trip to Washington, D.C., where Daniel lived, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would change everything, not just for her, but perhaps for the fight she'd inherited in her father's memory. For the first time since that fateful night, Ava felt a flicker of hope. If anyone could help her make sense of the chaos, maybe it was the man who once called her father a brother. The days following the incident felt like a blur, as if time itself had fractured under the weight of what happened. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. Headlines blared across every platform. Retired Army general killed by police dog. Tragedy sparks outcry over racial profiling. And who was Marcus Holloway? The name echoed everywhere, on television screens, in newspaper articles, and during heated conversations at dinner tables nationwide. For many, it wasn't just another tragic headline. It was a stark reminder of how fragile trust between communities and law enforcement had become. Protests erupted almost immediately. Crowds gathered outside police headquarters, holding signs that read "Justice for Marcus Holloway" and "Enough is enough." Some demonstrators marched silently, their faces somber and determined, while others chanted slogans demanding accountability. Social media amplified the movement, with hashtags trending globally. People shared stories of loved ones who had faced similar injustices, turning personal pain into collective anger. It was impossible to ignore the groundswell of emotion sweeping through the country. Amidst the chaos, Officer Mark Reynolds struggled to find his footing. Once a respected figure in his department, he now avoided eye contact with colleagues and neighbors alike. Guilt gnawed at him constantly, keeping him awake at night. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind. The way Marcus had turned, the sound of Zeus growling, the horrifying realization that he'd lost control of the situation. What could he have done differently? Should he have waited longer before approaching? These questions haunted him, but there were no easy answers. His wife, Claire, tried her best to support him, though she too wrestled with conflicting emotions. She believed Mark wasn't a bad person. He was simply someone caught in a terrible moment, but that didn't make the outcome any easier to accept. Friends stopped calling, afraid of saying the wrong thing or being associated with the controversy. Isolation crept in, wrapping itself around their home like a suffocating blanket. Even simple tasks, like grocery shopping, became unbearable when strangers stared or whispered behind their backs. While Mark retreated into silence, the spotlight shifted to the family left behind. Retired General Marcus Holloway wasn't just a name. He was a legacy. A decorated veteran who had served multiple tours overseas, Marcus dedicated his life to protecting others. His death left a void not only in his community, but also in the heart of his teenage daughter, Ava Holloway. At just 17 years old, Ava found herself thrust into an unimaginable role, that of grieving child and reluctant activist. Ava's grief was raw and unrelenting. Memories of her father flooded her thoughts daily. The way he laughed so deeply it seemed to shake the room. The advice he gave about standing tall even when the world tried to knock you down. But alongside the sorrow came anger. How could this happen to someone like him? Someone who gave so much to his country, only to lose his life in such a senseless way. As protests grew louder, Ava began attending rallies, clutching a framed photo of her dad close to her chest. Her presence struck a chord with people. It humanized the tragedy, reminding everyone that behind the headlines was a real person with dreams, hopes, and a family shattered by loss. Behind closed doors, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together exactly what went wrong that night. Internal reviews focused on Officer Reynolds' actions, questioning whether proper protocols were followed. Meanwhile, independent watchdog groups called for transparency, urging authorities to release bodycam footage and other evidence. Every detail mattered, because for families like Ava's, justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about understanding why this happened and ensuring it never happened again. As tensions mounted, one thing became clear. The ripple effects of that fateful evening would be felt far beyond Maryland. Lives had been changed forever, and the fight for truth was only beginning. The sun was setting over the quiet suburban streets of Maryland, casting long shadows across neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences. It was the kind of evening that felt almost too perfect, calm, peaceful, and uneventful. But beneath the surface of this picturesque scene, tension simmered like a storm waiting to break. Officer Mark Reynolds sat in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup. He had been on duty for 6 hours already, responding to minor complaints about noise or parking violations. Nothing out of the ordinary. That changed when dispatch crackled to life with a report of suspicious activity near one of the upscale homes. The caller described a tall black man walking slowly along the sidewalk, occasionally stopping to look around. To some, it might have sounded harmless, a neighbor taking an evening stroll, but in today's world, such descriptions often carried weight. Mark grabbed his radio and confirmed he was heading to the location. His K-9 partner, Zeus, perked up in the passenger seat, sensing his handler's shift in focus. Trained to detect threats and act decisively, Zeus was as much a tool of law enforcement as he was a loyal companion. As they drove toward the address, Mark couldn't shake the unease building in his chest. He told himself it was just another routine call, but experience had taught him not to underestimate situations like this. When they arrived, the street appeared deserted at first glance. Streetlights flickered on, illuminating empty sidewalks. Then Mark spotted him, a figure in the distance, walking with deliberate steps. It was General Marcus Holloway, though Mark didn't know that yet. Dressed casually in slacks and a sweater, Marcus carried a wooden cane gifted to him by his father decades ago. He used it more out of habit than necessity, finding comfort in its familiar weight. Marcus paused briefly to adjust his footing after tripping slightly on uneven pavement. In that moment, he instinctively raised the cane to steady himself. To anyone watching closely, it would have been clear he meant no harm. But through the lens of fear and assumption, the movement took on a different meaning. Mark exited his vehicle cautiously, hand resting on his holster. "Sir," he called out, his voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. "Stop right there." Zeus growled low in his throat, straining against his leash. Years of training kicked in, overriding any chance for calm communication. When Marcus turned toward the sound, confusion etched on his face. The situation escalated rapidly. Before either man could fully process what was happening, Zeus lunged forward, breaking free from Mark's grip. The dog's powerful jaws clamped down on Marcus's arm, knocking him off balance. Panic surged through both men as the encounter spiraled out of control. By the time backup arrived, it was too late. Marcus lay motionless on the ground, his cane discarded nearby. Paramedics worked frantically to save him, but the injuries were severe. News of the incident spread quickly, leaving shockwaves throughout the community. Who was this man? Why had things gone so wrong? And how could something so tragic happen in broad daylight? For Officer Reynolds, guilt weighed heavily on his shoulders. He replayed the moments leading up to the attack over and over in his mind, searching for answers. Little did he know, the true impact of that night would ripple far beyond the small Maryland suburb, touching lives across the nation and uncovering secrets no one saw coming.